So let's just get right into the minds of the people who believe this is happening, like, immediately.
Yeah.
Because there's a very vocal group of engineers and researchers and policymakers who do not see RSI as some distant science fiction hypothetical.
No, they don't.
They believe it is quite literally knocking at our door.
Yeah, their entire worldview is built on this immense sense of urgency. I mean, when they look at the current trajectory of artificial intelligence, the massive scaling of compute power, the rapid advances in algorithmic efficiency, they are entirely convinced that a system capable of true compounding self-improvement is possible in the very near term.
Which is terrifying if you really think about it.
Hmm.
And I want to break down what that fear actually looks like in practice. Because if you genuinely believe a system is about to become capable of upgrading its own intelligence at a runaway pace, your immediate reaction is going to be incredibly intense.
Well, absolutely. It's a panic response.
Right. And from what we are looking at in the sources, their primary goal is to actively block the democratization of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that is the ultimate priority for this mindset, containment. I mean, if you genuinely believe an intelligence explosion is weeks or maybe months away, you view widespread access to advanced models as an unacceptable danger.
You just can't risk it.
Exactly. You do not want a system capable of rapid recursive self-improvement sitting on millions of personal laptops. You want it completely quarantined.
Okay, let's unpack this fear of democratization for a second. It's almost like a group of scientists discovering how to initiate a completely new kind of nuclear chain reaction.
That's a good way to look at it.
But instead of figuring out how to build, safe reactors so everyone has free electricity, they just want to lock up all the uranium, ban the physics textbooks, and shut down every independent laboratory. Because they are absolutely terrified someone, somewhere, will accidentally build a bomb in their garage.
Right, and let's take that chain reaction analogy a step further, because it isn't just about someone building a bomb on purpose. It's about a reaction that, once it's started, it doesn't even need human input to keep accelerating.
Yes, it just goes on its own.
Exactly. And to prevent that, this group is pushing a very specific, aggressive playbook behind closed doors. They are advocating for heavy, sweeping regulations that would basically make it illegal to train AI models over a certain size without a government license.
License just to do the math.
Yeah, and they are pushing for strict export controls on the microchips used to train these systems, treating the hardware almost like it's weapons-grade material. And most notably, they want a deliberate hard limit on releasing the raw underlying architecture of these models to the public.
So you're talking about restricting the core mathematics, right, and the trained neural networks so that independent open source developers can't even tinker with them.
Exactly. They want to stop open weights.
But I mean, how realistic is it to just put a lid on math and code once the concepts are out in the world? Like throughout history, trying to put the genie back in the bottle when it comes to raw knowledge usually fails completely.
Sure.
Are regulations and export controls actually going to stop this? Or are they just hoping to buy, like, a tiny bit of time?
Well, the short-term believers, they would argue that when you are dealing with a potential runaway intelligence, buying even 6 months of time is a massive victory.
I guess that makes sense if you think the world is ending.
Right. But your skepticism points to a much deeper dynamic playing out in the industry right now. Because while this first group wants to lock the technology away out of a genuine, almost panic-induced fear of an uncontrolled explosion, there's another group pushing for the exact same lockdowns.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but their motives are vastly different and honestly, arguably much more self-serving.
Wait, so the people actually building these massive systems inside the frontier tech labs, they're also pushing to lock everything down. Are they just as terrified as the safety advocates?
Well, on the surface, the Frontier Labs share a fundamental premise with the first group. They also operate under the public assumption that recursive self-improvement, or at least a highly disruptive version of it, is achievable.
Because that's their whole pitch.
Exactly. They are raising billions of dollars based on that exact premise.
And here is where the dynamic seems incredibly suspicious to me. It seems like the companies building the models are using the panic of the first group as a convenient shield.
Oh, 100%.
Right. Their practical goal doesn't seem to be stopping the nuclear chain reaction. Their goal seems to be ensuring that their specific laboratory is the only one allowed to press the button.
It is a textbook shift from a stance of global preservation to a stance of just strategic dominance. I mean, this creates overwhelming incentives for these frontier labs to maintain absolute secrecy.
To protect their investment.
Right. To ensure they are the ones who achieve RSI first, they have to keep their most advanced systems completely closed off from the broader scientific community. Furthermore, they are highly incentivized to actively lobby against open-source AI development.
By framing it as a danger.
Exactly. They frame independent research as a literal security threat.
I have to challenge the narrative these labs are spinning, though. I mean, are they essentially walking into government offices and saying, hey, this technology is far too dangerous for the public or for small businesses or universities to possess? But don't worry, we're uniquely responsible enough to hold the ring of power.
That is pretty much exactly what they're doing.
Because that just sounds like regulatory capture. It sounds like an attempt to establish a permanent monopoly over what might be the most valuable technology on Earth.
And the implications of that strategy, well, they dictate your daily experience with this technology right now. I mean, when you, the listener, use a modern AI tool today, you are rarely interacting with the model itself.
Right.
You are interacting with a highly filtered, heavily restricted interface.
Yeah, I'm just sending a text prompt into a corporate portal, and they send an answer back. I don't actually possess the software at all.
Exactly. The true raw computational power of these models is deliberately hidden behind application programming interfaces or APIs, and those are almost always locked behind paywall.
Yep, $20 a month or whatever.
Right. The labs dictate how many messages you can send, what topics you're allowed to ask about, and exactly how the model is allowed to respond. By positioning themselves as the necessary gatekeepers protecting society from this RSI explosion, they simultaneously cement themselves as the sole arbiters of the technology.
Which is incredibly convenient for them.
It is. They get to dictate the rules of engagement and obviously the pricing for the rest of the global economy.
So we have a really fascinating alliance here. We have the terrified believers who want to lock it down to save the world. And then we have the opportunistic labs who want to lock it down to rule the world.
That's a great way to put it.
But both of those strategies hinge on one massive underlying assumption. And that is that an artificial intelligence capable of seamlessly rewriting its own code to become infinitely smarter is a technical reality that is right around the corner.
Right.
But what if the underlying math simply doesn't support that at all?
And that is the exact question driving the third major faction in this space, which is the skeptics.
Okay, tell me about them.
So this group consists of researchers and engineers who look at the exact same neural networks, the exact same massive compute clusters, and they conclude that full recursive self-improvement is essentially a mirage.
A total mirage.
Yeah. They believe the whole narrative of a rapid intelligence explosion is vastly overstated by people who honestly just don't fully understand the architectural bottlenecks of current machine learning.
I want to spend some real time here because it's incredibly easy to get swept up in the sci-fi hype of a machine just upgrading its own brain. But the skeptics aren't just crossing their arms and saying, oh, I doubt it.
No, they have receipts.
Right. They are pointing to very specific, stubborn flaws in how these models are physically built. So let's actually look under the hood. What is physically preventing an AI from just rewriting its code to be smarter?
Okay, well, the first major architectural wall is poor long-term memory. This is often discussed in the industry in terms of context windows. When an AI processes information, it doesn't learn a concept permanently in real time the way a human does. It basically holds text or code in a temporary working memory.
Okay, so if I upload a massive file of computer code for it to analyze, it's really just juggling all those lines of code in a temporary space.
Exactly. And that temporary space has a hard mathematical limit. So if an AI is going to recursively improve its own complex architecture over thousands of iterations, it needs a flawless ability to remember the entire history of its code base.
It has to know what it did yesterday.
Right. It needs to know what it just changed, why it changed it, and how that specific change interacts with millions of other lines of code spread across all these different modules. And current models struggle immensely with this. As the context gets larger, their attention mechanisms begin to literally break down.
They just get confused.
Yeah, they literally lose the plot. They start forgetting crucial variables that they themselves introduced just a few thousand lines earlier.
Okay, but couldn't engineers just build a system that actively learns and updates its permanent memory rather than relying on that temporary juggling act you mentioned?
And that brings us to the second, much more difficult hurdle, which is poor continual learning.
Okay.
In neural networks, permanent knowledge is stored as weights, which are essentially just billions of mathematical connections between artificial neurons. If you want a model to learn a brand new, highly complex coding technique permanently, you have to adjust those weights.
Makes sense. You change the math, it learns the new trick.
Right. The problem is a phenomenon called catastrophic forgetting.
Catastrophic forgetting. That sounds bad.
It is, because when you adjust the weights to learn the new coding trick, you are fundamentally altering the mathematical pathways that the system uses for literally everything else.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So often, when current models learn something new and complex, that new information mathematically overwrites or corrupts the old information. It might master a new algorithmic efficiency, but suddenly it forgets how to execute basic Python syntax.
Oh, I see.
And you cannot have a runaway compounding intelligence explosion if every 2 steps forward requires taking 1.5 steps backward just to relearn foundational knowledge.
That is fascinating. It's like trying to build a skyscraper, but every time you add a new floor on top, the foundation shifts and a random support beam on the third floor just dissolves.
That's a very accurate way to visualize the math, and it leads directly into their struggles with messy, subjective, or open-ended tasks. Current systems are incredibly impressive at interpolation, meaning they can connect the dots between things they have already seen in their massive training data. But redesigning a novel neural network architecture from scratch, that is wildly open-ended.
There's no training data for something that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. It requires leaps of intuition, dealing with immense ambiguity, and venturing into spaces where there is just no existing pattern to mimic. Current systems falter terribly in those unstructured, subjective spaces.
But the most critical bottleneck for me, the one from the sources that completely shatters the illusion of a runaway superintelligence, is the issue of self-evaluation.
Yes. The self-evaluation problem is perhaps the hardest mathematical wall to climb right now. Just think about the mechanical loop of recursive self-improvement for a second. Step 1, the AI writes a new, supposedly better version of its own code.
Okay.
Step 2, it has to evaluate that new code to determine if it is actually better before it implements it.
Right, because if it implements a flawed upgrade, it basically makes itself dumber.
Exactly. And if it makes itself dumber, its next upgrade will be even worse, which creates a recursive downward spiral until the system breaks entirely.
Which is the opposite of an intelligence explosion.
Right. Large language models are fundamentally designed to predict the next most likely word or token based on statistical patterns. They are not objective truth verifiers. So if an AI proposes a completely novel, highly complex change to its own architecture, how does it know it actually works?
It can't know.
Right, it can't just guess based on text patterns. It would have to compile the code, deploy it, run millions of benchmark tests, and critically analyze the results.
And if the AI suffers from hallucinations, which we absolutely know these systems do, it might evaluate its own broken code and confidently declare, yes, this is brilliant, let's implement it.
Precisely. The skeptics argue that it is incredibly difficult to turn short-horizon gains into stable, compounding loops.
So to synthesize this, it's for everyone listening,
Yeah.
it's like we've built an AI that acts like a student who is an absolute genius at cramming for a multiple-choice test.
Yeah.
We see those short-horizon games all the time. It passes the bar exam, it writes a functional script, it does great on tests. But the moment you ask that same student to lock themselves in a room, write an original 100-page doctoral thesis on a topic that has never been studied, and then objectively grade their own paper without any outside help, they just completely fall apart. They start making things up, and they give themselves an A+ for gibberish.
That multiple choice versus thesis analogy captures the architectural divide perfectly. The skeptics emphasize that the real constraints holding back RSI aren't just a matter of scale.
It's not just about building a bigger computer.
No, it isn't just about how many billions of dollars you spend or how many servers you plug in or who is allowed to access the system. The constraints are deeply rooted in the data architecture itself. The foundational blueprint of predicting the next token might simply be mathematically incapable of true recursive self-improvement.
Which completely flips the script on the entire industry. Because if you are in Camp 3, if you see these massive architectural walls and you realize the machine is going to suddenly wake up and turn itself into a god, your view on whether the public should have access to this technology is fundamentally different.
It leads to a completely different policy worldview. The skeptics do not expect a sudden, rapid takeoff of superintelligence, so they do not view open source AI as an existential threat.
Right.
They look at the exact same mathematical blueprints as the terrified believers. But instead of seeing a nuclear chain reaction, they just see a really capable, albeit flawed, software tool.
They aren't terrified of a global wildfire because they know the matches are physically incapable of burning down the forest.
Exactly. And this brings us to the immense pressure cooker that is currently building across the entire global tech landscape. You can really see how these three distinct positions are pulling the strings behind the headlines.
Oh, for sure.
You have the terrified believers and the opportunistic gatekeepers forming this strange alliance. They are pushing hard for restricted access, tighter regulations, and closed systems. Meanwhile, the skeptics are fighting tooth and nail against those regulations, pushing for openness, transparency, and the decentralization of the technology.
Let's talk about the business implications of this pressure cooker, specifically for those frontier labs who are keeping everything locked behind their corporate portals.
Yeah, the stakes are huge there.
Because if the skeptics are right about catastrophic forgetting and the inability of these models to evaluate their own code, aren't the closed labs in massive trouble?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they have raised hundreds of billions of dollars on the explicit promise that they are building a fundamentally new kind of self-improving entity. If strong recursive improvement doesn't materialize fast enough inside their walls, doesn't the entire economic justification for keeping their systems closed completely fall apart?
You have just articulated the central stakes of this entire deep dive. The financial valuations of these frontier labs are inextricably tied to the promise of RSI.
Right.
They justify locking you out, and they justify charging massive premium access fees by pointing to a future where their machine becomes a compounding superintelligence.
But if RSI is a mirage,
If RSI is a mirage, or, even if it is just several decades further away than they claim due to those persistent architectural constraints, then their secretive frontier systems are just standard software products.
and standard software gets copied.
Exactly. History shows us that standard software products eventually get commoditized. If the underlying architecture is just next token prediction, the open source community will slowly but surely catch up. The economic and competitive case for maintaining a massive, secretive, closed garden weakens every single day that true compounding self-improvement fails to materialize.
That is just wild to think about. The intense battle over recursive self-improvement isn't just a niche academic debate about AI safety. It's a ticking clock on the business models of the most powerful companies on Earth.
Yes, it is.
And depending on which camp wins this war in Washington and in the boardrooms, it will dictate exactly what kind of software you will be allowed to use in your daily life. Will you have access to the raw computational weights to build your own private customized tools? Or will you forever be forced to rent access through a highly restricted, heavily metered corporate portal?
The outcome of this debate will honestly dictate the entire future of how digital capabilities, economic leverage, and raw knowledge are distributed globally.
So to quickly recap the landscape we've just traversed today, we've got three distinct camps fighting a hidden war. We have the panicked believers who look at the scaling of compute power and are desperately trying to lock down the technology to prevent what they see as an imminent, uncontrollable chain reaction.
Then we have the opportunistic gatekeepers inside the major labs. They agree the technology is powerful, but they are essentially utilizing the fear generated by the first group to justify keeping the best systems closed, ensuring they remain the ultimate arbiters of the industry.
Right. And finally, we have the grounded skeptics standing in the back of the room, pointing at the glaring structural flaws.
Yeah.
They are pointing out the catastrophic forgetting, the context window limits, and the absolute inability of these systems to reliably evaluate their own code.
Yeah.
They argue that this whole self-improvement narrative is vastly overstated, and therefore the technology should remain open and accessible to everyone.
Which leaves us with a really critical perspective to consider as you watch this play out in the news. As you see massive tech companies lobbying governments, and as you watch the ferocious debates raging over open source access, you have to critically examine the narratives being sold to us. What if the real existential risk we should be worrying about isn't a runaway machine superintelligence at all? What if the true danger is that society permanently hands over control of human knowledge and economic power to a handful of corporate gatekeepers, and that surrender is completely justified by a phantom fear of a self-improving machine that was never actually technically possible in the first place?
Now that is a thought that will absolutely stick with you the next time you hit a usage limit or an API paywall on your favorite tool.